folks, it is me once again, Abraham Klein, on the talk show called The Talk Show! Yes, thank you. Give me a hand, folks! Yeah. If you're my biggest fan, give me a woo! I don't think you heard me right. I said if you're my biggest fan, give me a woo! Apparently I'm not anybody's biggest fan. Nobody's my biggest fan. Anyway, okay, let's get on the phone line. Paul from Clarksburg, Pennsylvania. What do you want?
I'd like to order a large pepperoni pizza, and could you put 1/10 of that with mushrooms and another 10th in olives?
Wait, listen to me. This is not a pizza restaurant.
What is it?
This is a talk show.
Yeah, well, could we talk about pizza? I'm kind of hungry right now.
And hello, my name is Abraham Klein, and what you just heard there in the beginning was a small portion of a much longer file recording of me and some of my friends that we recorded in my parents' garage on my little karaoke machine when I was about 9-10 years old. And that was me doing my best impersonation of a fellow by the name of Marty Minto. He was a local radio personality. I think he might have also been a local minister. But his name was Marty Minto, and he was on a station called 101.5 WORD out of Pittsburgh. And he did a show where they basically talked about, it was a Christian talk radio show. In the same respect that like Rush Limbaugh was, and guys like Sean Hannity and Michael Savage, Glenn Beck, and all those guys do. So it was a talk show, basically. And 101.5, as I pointed out, was a Christian radio station. They had shows like Adventures in Odyssey, which is one that I liked to listen to. One of the main reasons I listened to the station. I think they had like Charles Stanley. They had Focus on the Family, Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible Answer Man, what was that? J. Vernon McGee, Through the Bible, and all these other different programs that they would play throughout the day. But in the afternoons, they would play one called The Marty Minto Show. And so what you heard there was basically me doing my best attempt at trying to do a talk show around the age of 9 or 10 years old. And so over the years, that was where it sort of started, that bug of enjoying the idea of talking on the radio. And I've never had a radio show. I've been on the radio a few times, local radio stations and things like that. But that started that love of telling stories and talking, and eventually that developed into things like writing and things like that. And I've had the opportunity to write for different local publications mostly. And I've also had the opportunity to do a couple podcasts. And what I am trying to do right now is maybe a next phase of that. Not to say that the other types of programs that I've done in the past are faded out, but this is just more or less a addition to the canon of what has already been created, I guess you might say. An example with the program I've done before, it's called Yinzer Club. We talk with people about their organization or their business or some hobby that they do, whatever it might be. And we've had the opportunity to interview people about, from civil rights organizations, religious organizations, and things like that. And basically it's an opportunity for people to tell their stories and talk about their passions. And I've always enjoyed that when it comes to interviews that I've done with people, and it's a very fun thing to do, and it's just something I enjoy, to hear people passionately talk about the things that they enjoy, whether it be trying to stand up for certain rights of individuals, or if it's just some local raffle that they do on an annual basis. They're passionate about it and they're talking about it, and I've always enjoyed that. And so what I'm trying to do with this first ever episode is, like I said, a continuation of that, where we will talk to different people about perhaps their organization that they're with, or perhaps their life story. There's a lot of people out there with very interesting stories, who, you may know, people you might know, people you may have met in your local area, and this would be an opportunity to do that, where they get to tell their story. And what I want to do on this show, podcast, whatever you want to call it, is just life in general, and how we get through it and how we deal with things and people's different perspectives. Because the thing is, we don't know where life is going to lead us. You don't know what kind of thing you're going to be involved with. You may be right now living in Western Pennsylvania, living in the country, and before you know it, you might be living in a city in Texas. You don't know where life's going to lead you. And so life changes. And that'd be probably the first subject I want to talk about on this program, is the idea of life change. But before I get into that, just continuing with the introduction of what I'm talking about, is that I want to talk about just different life topics, because I've dealt with a lot of health issues in my life, and that of course has led to a lot of other issues in life, where I've had to miss out on things, or I've been limited in other areas. And I also grew up in a Christian home, and so there's that unique aspect of my life. I'm not calling this a Christian podcast. It's a podcast that's hosted by a Christian. Like Chick-fil-A is not a Christian restaurant. It's just a restaurant owned by Christians. And so that's basically what this is. It's the Chick-fil-A of podcasts. They put that as a tagline. I don't know, but but I bring that perspective to this because I have grown up in that environment. I grew up with older parents. And so as a result of having older parents, I've lost both of my parents before I even turned 30. And so talking about that and dealing with those things and talking with other people about those things, whether it be a loss in their life, or maybe there was an addiction or a very bad place in their life that they've dealt with, I want to have that. And I don't want to just simply be a monologue where I'm on here talking about my life and what I've been through and what I've experienced and all that, although that's sort of the foundation of it, is beginning with what I'm talking about. But hopefully we can have other people on this program, on this podcast, to talk about those many different things. And maybe through that we can get a better understanding of one another and where we're from, because we're far too quick to judge than we are to understand one another. I think that's a real problem. And as I said, because I'm bringing this, maybe there'll be subjects I talk in here that may not be for every listener, although it could be. But you may not find as interesting because, maybe I'll be talking about something in regards to growing up in church. And so maybe you, as a person who hasn't grown up in church, it may not relate to you, but you'll be able to get that perspective. And so the idea that it may not completely relate to you doesn't mean it doesn't have to relate to you. Maybe you can relate in another way. Maybe there's some other experience you've gone through, and what we talk about in that subject can in some way relate to you. When I talk about my time in the hospital, not everybody's been to the hospital in the same way that I have, in which I've been on life support on more than one occasion. I've had to be life flighted. I've flatlined. I've gone into cardiac arrest and all those things. You may not understand those things, but hopefully there's some things that we can talk about on this podcast that can speak to you and try to help you. And maybe not just help you, hopefully inspire you, hopefully help others as well, and maybe start dialogues with other people and talk about it. And when I say a dialogue, I don't mean this is me talking and everybody else sit in the back and listen, because that's called a lecture. Okay, that's not a dialogue. That's not a conversation. A conversation is actually what it actually is, a conversation. Sometimes I will talk with people that I don't agree with. Sometimes I'll talk with people who may see it from a different perspective. Because, I talk about, one of the things we'll talk about on here probably a lot is mental health. Because I've had to deal with it in my own life. I had to deal with my family and things like that. And I realize that there's people out there who don't see it from the same way I do. There are people who look at mental health more or less as emotions, and you're just feeling sorry for yourself. And I have lived and experienced it enough to know that that is not just what it is. But we'll let those people come on and talk, because the idea is to understand one another and talk about life. And so, with all that being said, what would we call this? Well, hopefully, if it comes up and you see it in the title when we post this, we're going to just call it The Talk Show. Basically, give it the name that we gave it from when I was just a child of only 9 or 10 years old. Because I don't know what else to call it, honestly. I thought of something about survivors, because that'd be one thing that we do a lot about is surviving. Whether it be someone who survived through health, or someone who survived abuse, or someone who survived addiction, or someone who survived any number of things. But I couldn't really come up with a title for that. So just to make sure we get everything covered, we're just going to call it The Talk Show. And so, as I said, the first subject I want to deal with today is how life changes. And life changes a lot. I don't know if you noticed this, but you're not the same age you were last year. And you will not be the same age next year. And as time goes on, eventually things are going to change about you physically. For some of you, that can be a good thing, because maybe right now you're just a little, twerpy tween who has acne and braces, and, you feel like you're a complete disaster right now, but then one day, who knows, you'll be strong or beautiful and have, the braces will be gone, the acne will be gone. And that's not to say that you're ugly when you're just, you're still changing. Your life's still changing. And one day life can be completely different. And so I understand, life changes. You're born, you're an infant, you're just a baby. Eventually you become, a toddler, and you become an adolescent, you become a teenager, you become an adult, you become an elderly person, and eventually you die. And hopefully all of that in that order. Hopefully, you don't die too soon. Life changes automatically, but it also sometimes changes dramatically, and sometimes very quickly. I want to start by talking about an example from my own life. I don't know if I'll have the chance to bring the picture up. With these being pre-recorded, I plan to have these edited to where I can bring up maybe voice recordings or videos or images and things like that. And if I have the chance to bring it up, this is a picture of me in 2012 and a couple boys that I knew. I won't use their names because I have not asked their permission to use their names. But this was us back in 2012. This was right after what was called church camp. For those of you who may not be aware, church camp is basically like going to summer camp, except it's with church. And so this was a picture of us taken. We picked the boys up earlier at the beginning of the week, and we took them to the camp throughout the week, and this was me driving them back to meet their mother in Ohio at the end of the week. And at that point in my life, I remember, I just had a big smile on my face, because I was very excited about where life was going. I had just spent, and I remember that life was feeling like it was going ahead. I just come back from a trip to Georgia. I had spent time down there at a camp meeting, and that was my first time flying by myself. And I just gone through this whole week of just great meetings. And if you're a Christian and you've been to a church camp or camp meeting, that's a chance to get away, and basically a way of trying to get a little bit spiritually refreshed. And I remember feeling like life was going in a great direction. I was working a job that I really enjoyed, and I was hoping in the very near future to move out of my parents' home and try to maybe move up where I was at, or move on to a different kind of job of that sort, of driving or whatever, and eventually get married and start a family and begin my life as I saw it. And everything was so optimistic. There was no indication that there was going to be any type of negative change. And within a couple weeks, I got the first hints of what would be the next several years of my life. that was July 8th, I believe, July 7th or 8th, and July 24th I went for my annual physical. As a bus driver, being a CDL driver, I had to get an annual physical to make sure my hearing was okay, my eyesight, all those things were good, and they would have to test me. I had to pee in a bottle, basically. And I remember ominously now, they asked me, how do you feel like your overall health is? And I said, excellent. That's what I marked. And we went through the usual shebang of, getting everything done. And I was getting ready to go down to West Virginia with some friends. And they brought me into a room like they always do, just to review your health, what your numbers from the day. And they said, hey, we just wanted you to know we noticed some blood in your urine. And they said, it's not to be alarmed, it's not a whole lot, but it might be something maybe to look into in the near future if it gets any worse. And I was like, okay, and I went on my way. And little did I know that eventually, not long after that, I ended up in the hospital, finding out I didn't have health insurance. And so there was all manner of just things that would happen within just a few months that would leave me just spun, just completely thrown for a loop, to where I went from feeling like I'm going to move out of my parents' home and start living my life on my own to, well, can't do that anymore right away because now I have all this hospital debt, and it wasn't just like normal like fix your car up debt. It was thousands of dollars. Just a matter of a couple months, I ended up, I had to get a CT scan, and I had to be very selective with when I went to the doctors because I didn't have health insurance at the time, and but they did have the eye care program, which was able to, at the hospital, which is like a charity program where if you make under a certain amount of money, they pay all or a portion of your bill, your medical bill. And so that was helpful, obviously. But life became very stressful very quickly. And I found myself digressing and moving backward in life. And from that time, July 24th to about September 16th of 2014, life changed so dramatically. Within about a year, I started needing blood transfusions. Eventually I got health insurance, and I started going to see specialists and different people. I saw an oncologist. I saw a urologist, and all the many weird procedures that come with those types of things. Because first they thought I had cancer, and then they thought there might have been something wrong with my bladder, and then eventually they got it right where there was something wrong with my kidneys, and there was this idea you might be dying of cancer, and it's just, there was so much happening all at one time, and and it was just so much at 21 years old. And eventually I started to need blood transfusions, and I was seeing folks like an oncologist and things like that, and I was seeing him on a pretty regular basis. And for a while I tried to ignore it because, well, okay, low blood, I don't have time to go to the hospital because that's going to be hours of waiting to get the blood transfusion, and all those other different things, and what if I have a bad reaction, and all these other things. And then eventually I had to end up missing work and get blood transfusion and an iron transfusion. And it's crazy to think back on now, because I would hope now that I wouldn't be that way, because that's where I was at that time. I was more concerned with trying to make sure I got to work to pay off my bills than I was, because at that time I kind of wasn't really taking it as serious. I mean, I knew it was a very serious thing, and I felt like, I remember at one point in the year 2014 thinking, I don't think I'm going to live to see the year 2015. Which is a weird thing to think about, like, I don't think I'm going to live to see that year. But eventually, it got so serious to where it was affecting my motor skills. I ended up, I couldn't grasp things with my hands anymore. And I was doing what I could to get by because I didn't want to lose my job, and on all those other things. that I was having to lift my one leg up just to try to walk properly, even though I wasn't walking properly, but my gait was bad and all these other things. And that's the thing too, because I was having these constant low blood issues, and they were like, at one point they had to call me and say, hey, look, your blood's down to 7. It's supposed to be up toward like a 12. They said when it gets that low, you could die, you could have a heart attack, and of course that got my attention. And but from then to then, I went from feeling so invincible, not that I was saying I'm invincible, but feeling so optimistic about the future, to feeling like I don't think I'm going to live much longer in a very short amount of time. It's a bit of a shock to the system. And what ended up causing me to go to the hospital was the fact that I just couldn't do it anymore. I walked out. I went to go out to my bus one day, and I collapsed in the bus parking lot. And some of the drivers saw me, and they all came to my aid. They thought I'd passed out. I'd actually just buckled under my legs because I didn't have barely any strength. And I remember, if I look back, because I went from 120 pounds, which is not big, by the way, down to less than 100 pounds in a very short amount of time. And I've seen pictures from back in that time. It looks so sickly. But basically, the bus company where I was working said you can't work here until you get those problems resolved. And so I was basically like, okay, so now what am I going to do? And I had a couple more days I could work because I had to show somebody else my route, be able to drive, and I had to show them my route and things like that. And I remember I was so weak that day that the lady that one of my fellow, because I couldn't drive myself, my mother had driven me to work, and then one of my co-workers drove me home, and I was so weak she actually had to help carry me into the house because that's how weak I was. And it's just crazy. But even before that, like, I had to use a pair of pliers because, again, my grip wasn't good, so I had to use a pair of pliers to turn the keys on the bus. I had to use all my might to release the air brake, which these are things on a commercial vehicle. The air brakes, which you push them in to go so that you release the brake, and you put it in neutral, and then you release the air brake, and that makes it so it stops or whatever. And so I was very weak. And then it turned out I also had a cyst on my spine, and then I was also going through kidney failure, and just like that, life changed so drastically. And in the meantime, I was trying to go through all sorts of health changes. I had changed my diet to vegetarian, and eating was just a chore, and I was losing more weight. It was not a fun time at all. But life changed that drastically. And the question is, what do you do when life changes that drastically? Because all of this culminated in me getting a back surgery, and then subsequently spending 6 more months in the hospital, 3 weeks in a coma, and then having to go through being completely bedridden, a vegetable, to working your way up to trying to eventually get out of the hospital. And these are just crazy things that happened, and life changed that drastically. And then I ended up having to consequently spend 6 years on dialysis as a result of that, because I ended up going through full kidney failure. And life changed that quickly. I went from being an independent young man, ready to take on the world and work and start my life, to dialysis patient. Can't breathe on his own, can't talk, can't walk, can't move, can't do anything on his own. I was basically an infant again. I couldn't move on my own. It's a weird sensation to not be able to move your body, like your legs or your arm. And I could move my arms a little bit, but it was weird. And I developed a lot of defense mechanisms or survival mechanisms, you might call them, to try to handle all that, because it's hard to really just deal with it constantly, and it threw me in so many different ways. I questioned just everything. I questioned everything about my life. I questioned everything about who I was and why I was doing the things that I was doing. Because it's very easy to live comfortably in the life that you know. And only when that is upset and challenged do you have to really stop and ask yourself, is this really something I should be doing? And maybe eventually in the course of this program we'll talk more about that, because that's a very serious thing to talk about, because so many people they live so comfortably in a certain lifestyle because that's their comfort zone, and they never really ask the question why, and when problems come they can't deal with it because they've never asked themselves that question. Because they never asked themselves that question, when everything's going so crazy, they just give up and quit. And so that's definitely a huge thing that really has to be considered in life. But so what we're talking about today is that life changes, and life can change very drastically, and it may not be just like I said, like what happened to me, but life changes. Over that same course of time, I ended up losing both of my parents and my grandmother. Those three people were like pillars in my life. They were huge supporters of me in my life. My dad was somebody that I always liked. I always wanted to impress because he was dad. And mom was always somebody I wanted to impress because she was mom. And grandma I always wanted to impress because she was grandma. And I always knew grandma was going to be my biggest fan no matter what I did. I knew mom and dad were going to be my biggest fans no matter what I did. Although dad would judge me more, you might say, more realistically than maybe mom or grandma would. And so life changed a lot. I used to live in a town called Clarksburg, and now I live in a town called Salzburg. Life's changed a lot. And life can change very quickly. And this program is not to instill fear, but it's to talk about these uncomfortable things that we don't always like to talk about. Because the question is, what do you do when life changes? I've known kids that have come home one day and found out that their father was no longer going to be their father anymore, or that mama was no longer going to be their mama anymore. I mean, they would still biologically be their parents, but they weren't going to be involved in their lives anymore. I've known young men. I know a young man who, in particular, who was with us at an open gym night, and he was told he lost his brother. Just out of nowhere, life changed. Out of nowhere, life can change. Just one simple thing. At the time of this recording, it was about probably 23 years ago. My parents were involved in an accident. A young lady coming back from her hometown, I believe it was in like Moon Township, Coriopolis, Pennsylvania. She was coming back from winter break to go back to college. And by whatever means it was, she ended up in a head-on collision with my parents. And just like that, well, her life was gone, sadly. And the lives of her parents were changed forever. And as a result, our lives were changed forever. Forever we would, in some way, live with the remembrance that this very sad, very unfortunate accident happened. This beautiful young lady who would now be, possibly a mother and of probably even teenagers by now, was gone. And my parents, they ended up getting into the wreck. My dad had some broken ribs. My mom ended up having to be taken to the hospital and had to go through several weeks of therapy, and I, for a couple weeks, had no parents because I had to be watched by somebody else. And that ended up leading us to moving from Altman to Clarksburg, and just so many other things changed, and life can change so quickly. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. Rudyard Kipling used the term, he used the statement in his poem, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for the doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting. If you can, or being lied about, don't do on lies. Or being hated, don't give way to hating. And yet, don't look too good nor talk too wise. But in that poem, he also said, if you can meet with triumph and disaster, and treat those two impostors just the same. Basically saying that triumph doesn't last. Disaster doesn't last. Life changes constantly. And so we should never be too proud when things are good, but never be too far down when things are bad. Yeah, sometimes there's some things that we do lose permanently, like a mother or a father, at least on this side. But life doesn't stay the same. Life will change. So, just because your team wins the Super Bowl this year, well, guess what? They have to defend that title next year. And so that triumph only lasts for so long. Sure, they'll get to keep that ring or whatever it is that they get and that payday. And they can always say they won the Super Bowl. And so that's not a reason to never try. But the truth is, triumph can only last for so long. There's people who've won the Super Bowl and end up dying broke. There's people that have done great things in this life and end up dying alone and miserable. And so the idea that life doesn't change is foolish. So life changes very quickly, but what do we do in those circumstances? And this is me going from my own experience of having to go through these things. Is what do we do in those times? The Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes 3, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the earth. Time and chance happens to us all. That's what the Bible says in Ecclesiastes 9:11. And so life changes all the time. It changes very drastically, and it's never going to stay the same. So what do you do when it does? I would say, first of all, wait for the dust to settle. When it's still thundering and lightning, it's not a good time to be making very important decisions. I understand that there is, depending on the circumstances, sometimes an immediate decision has to be made, whether you can think about it or not. But for most decisions, you have to wait and understand, and then think about what the options are forward. And then keep working toward that goal to get out of that place that you're at. The key to establishing or getting anywhere in life is repetition or persistence. The idea of never giving up. And I know that term is thrown around so much that it's basically just a cliche, but it is a true statement. Don't give up. Keep on going. Stay persistent. Because that really is the way to get somewhere. You had to learn to read by reading over and over and over and over and over and over again until you got it. You learn to add by adding over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until you got it. Same goes for everything that we do in this life. To get somewhere, we have to just stay persistent and keep going. And when we fail, just because you fail a test doesn't mean that your school career is over. Sadly, right? Doesn't mean your school career is over. That means you have another opportunity to correct the problems that were wrong and learn them, and hopefully the next time you don't fail. And if you do, work harder and keep going and keep going and keep going. And that goes for the tests that we take in school, and that goes for the things that we do in life. When life changes in an instant and we have to try to get out of that place, that very dark place, as I call it, to get out of that toward a better, life, a better place in life, a better spiritual life. For those of us who are Christians, when it comes to a relationship with God, it is a constant, daily commitment to the things of God and reading His Word and praying and staying faithful to His Word and staying faithful to His work. It's persistence. And of course, when it comes to to spiritual things, it's not to necessarily be a robotic thing, but it has to. Sometimes it has to be a robotic thing until it becomes something that becomes a passion. Sometimes you have to do the things that you don't want to do. When you're really tired and you still have to read or still have to talk to God that day, sometimes to make sure you don't miss, you just do it anyway. Because that's what you have determined to do. And again, I'm one who hated therapy when I was in the hospital for those 6 months and then 3 months. See, because that was the second big problem, was that I was in the hospital for 6 months in 2014, and then I ended up in the hospital for another 3 months in 2017. That was when it was probably worse than this first time, in that, I had to start from scratch, but I also ended up flatlining and ended up with I ended up with scars on my head and on my face and things like that. But I had to go through therapy, and so I had to do it over and over and over and over again. And here's the thing about it, is that sometimes therapy was just therapy people come into the room, they say, all right, we're going to try to stand. And you stand there. And you stand there, and you stand there, and you stand there, and you're not going to be running a marathon, but you just got to stand and stand and stand and stand and stand until you're tired and you sit down. And before it was standing, it was, try to lift your arms up in your bed. Hold them up there. See how long you can hold them up. Maybe do some repetitions. 1, 2, 3. And those were difficult. But I couldn't expect things to just change. I wasn't just going to wake up one morning and jump out of bed and pull off the oxygen and take off all the needles and run out the door. It was going to take a long, long time, and it took a long, long time. And what made it even worse was all the relapses that I went to. In fact, there was a time I relapsed so bad where it was like the second time that I ended up going through to respiratory sleep, because they'd take me off the ventilator. And I tried to sleep without it one night, and I ended up going into respiratory sleep. And so I ended up back in the hospital again, which is not a good sign, because you're in the recovery, you're in the transitional care, and you get sent back to the hospital to recover from that. Because when you're there, you're not getting therapy. And I gave up. I flat out gave up. And thankfully, there were people, my pastor being one of them, who I think he got frustrated with me and just scolded me and said, you have to find a reason to keep going, Abe. You have to find a reason to keep going. And, some friends of mine visited me, and they sang a song, and it was, a huge blessing to me as well. And our assistant pastor visited me, and he asked me how I was doing, and instead of the usual, good, I was like, yeah, I'm not doing good. I'm not doing good. And I guess, that's the thing, too. Just be honest sometimes. You just have to be honest with where you're at and acknowledge that life is not good. And you don't want it to be that way anymore. But at that point, I give up. I'm going to spend the rest of my life like this. I'm never going to walk again. I'm never going to talk again. I'm never going to breathe on my own again. I'm going to be this for the rest of my life because I had it. And by the grace of God, I had those people to talk to me, and there was a nurse, and if I could ever find that woman again, I would want to just thank her, and just thank her and thank her and thank her so much, because again, I wasn't able to do therapy, but she was able to get me out of bed into a chair, and she would lift me out of my chair and help me stand for a little bit. And, and she would do that with me for several minutes. And I believe it was during the daytime when she was there. although it might have been closer because I think it was dark when that was happening. It was dark outside or whatever. But she came in and she would help me stand for a little bit. And at one point, she was like, she let me go, and I was standing there by myself. And it gave me that small amount of hope, that little itty bitty small amount of hope that maybe I'm going to make it. And that was January, and 2 months later I got out of the hospital. And I almost gave up. And I did give up. And almost gave up for good. And so when it comes to life changes, obviously when life changes for the good, you just rejoice, right? The truth is, life's not always going to be the same. You know, the group of friends that you have right now, it's not going to be that way forever. I had a friend once comment about the fact that, you know, he sees life where it's at right now, where his family is young, and he's living around his family and friends that he loves. And he's like, I don't want anything to change. I don't want life to change. And of course, I know he knows that life does. But sometimes when it comes to the good things, you know, they just don't seem to last, do they? And we know they don't last. But that's comforting because we also know that the bad times don't last. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we'll let them prolong longer than they have to by just giving up. And so first of all, when something happens, it's very important to stop and wait for things to settle, and then find where you have to go, what you have to do, and find a goal to aim for. You know, things like finding a schedule for your day, trying to find a routine, certain things that you do. You know, my life has become very routined over the years, and it's helped a lot. It's helped a lot with life and things like that. And then persistently trying to get to a better place. Consistently trying to get to that better place. Understanding that you will mess up, can mess up. It's not always going to be perfect all the time, but that you keep on working toward that goal and getting there until you finally do. And you know, I'm also aware that you can also be on that route and life can change drastically again. Because as I said, I was in the hospital in 2014 and I was working toward life getting better. And around that same time in 2017, I had just gotten promoted at my other job, at my current job that I was at, called Evergreen after Boys and Girls Club is what it was called then. And I had just been promoted to lead staff. I was so excited about how life was going. Again. But, and just like that, I got pneumonia. I went to the hospital, ended up going into a coma and all that other stuff. And so I realized that even when you're on your way there, life can again change dramatically. At any moment, something bad could happen. But as long as there's still a pulse, there's still a reason to go on. As long as there is still hope, there's still a reason to keep going. Just keep trying. Keep trying to get to a better place. And even if you may not be where you want to be, the fact that you are working toward that alone will put you in a much better place. A lot of it has to do with your attitude. Because even if, as I said, even if you're not where you want to be, financially, socially, spiritually, the fact that you're working toward a better place alone can make life much better. Because continuing to wallow in that sadness and grief and depression and bitterness or whatever it is does not help. It's not going to get better. It's not going to change the circumstance. And so I hope we can continue these kind of conversations. As I said, I don't want this to just simply be a monologue. I hope it to be a dialogue, and maybe a dialogue between several people. And hopefully this goes somewhere. Again, I don't know exactly where a program like this will go or what purpose it might serve in a person's life, but I hope that to somebody it can be an inspiration in a good way and can be a bit of help for all of us in some way. So as I said, that was our subject for today, was talking about life changing, how life changes drastically, how it changes quickly. And it can change for the good, it can change for the bad, but the thing is it's always changing. Life goes on, right? While you're in a very happy place right now, somebody else might be in the very depths of despair. And so life changes. And so that was our subject for today. I want to thank you for watching or listening. And this has been almost a 45-minute broadcast. We hope you join us again if we ever do one of these again. If you see another one, well, then you'll know that we did it. But I want to thank you for watching, and you have a great day.